1844, Tennessee. The boy who spoke a language no one knew. My name is Professor Edmund Crowe, antiquarian specializing in occultist manuscripts, and for 40 years I have dedicated my existence to studying cases that defy human comprehension. In my private archives, kept under 7 locks in a reinforced safe, rests the most disturbing documentation that has ever crossed my desk, the case of Isaiah Blackwood. This story began when I received an anonymous correspondence on a cold October morning. The envelope, sealed with black wax and without a return address, contained photographs that made me question the very foundations of reality. The images showed Isaiah Blackwood in different stages of a transformation that contradicts all known laws of human biology. Ladies and gentlemen, what you will hear today is not fiction. Every word has been verified through official documents, censored medical records, and testimonies from people who preferred to remain anonymous for fear of their lives. This investigation cost me not only my professional reputation but also my peace of mind. In 1844, in the shadowy depths of Franklin County, Tennessee, a medical conspiracy of unimaginable proportions was conducting experiments that violated not only ethics but the very laws of nature. What I discovered in the basement of that haunted institution still awakens me in cold sweats during the early hours. The organization responsible for these atrocities operated under the name Order of Ancestral Tongues, a secret society composed of renegade doctors, European occultists, and unscrupulous industrialists who believed they could manipulate the fundamental processes of human consciousness. Their methods were as revolutionary as they were diabolical. For months, I infiltrated obscure academic circles, traversed abandoned libraries, and interviewed survivors who trembled at the mention of those dark times. What I reconstructed from this investigation is a mosaic of horror that defies our understanding of the limits of human ambition corrupted by absolute power. My investigation initially led me to the State Medical Archives, where I discovered records that had been systematically adulterated. Pages torn out, falsified stamps, signatures erased with acid. Someone had methodically worked to erase any trace of the events of 1844. However, bureaucratic incompetence is sometimes our ally. In a poorly catalogued file, I found carbon copies of reports that should have been destroyed decades ago. These documents revealed the existence of a secret wing in the Franklin County Psychiatric Hospital, officially designated as Section for Advanced Research in Rare Cognitive Phenomena. Dr. Elijah Winters, the director of this section, kept detailed records of his activities. His diaries, written in a disturbing mixture of archaic German and medical Latin, described experiments that would make medieval inquisitors recoil in horror. Isaiah Blackwood was identified in the records only as Specimen V7, a child of 5 years selected for specific genetic characteristics. The methodology documented by Winters combined experimental medicine with rituals derived from medieval alchemical traditions. He believed that human language was a physiological limitation that could be manipulated through the controlled administration of plant substances mixed with cranial fluid extracts from cadavers. Photographs attached to the reports show Isaiah Blackwood at different stages of the experiments. The initial images reveal a healthy child, with bright eyes and a shy smile. Subsequent photographs document a transformation that seems to violate the fundamental laws of biology, physical manifestations that compressed centuries of evolutionary divergence into a matter of weeks. For 3 months, Winters administered daily injections of his linguistic liberation solution directly into Isaiah's spinal cord and nasal passages. The effects were documented with frightening scientific precision: changes in laryngeal structure in the 2nd week, altered brain activity patterns in the 3rd, unprecedented neural connections in the 4th. But the physical aspects were only part of the horror. Psychological records show that Isaiah maintained his childlike mentality while his ability to comprehend and produce human language was systematically destroyed and replaced. Imagine the confusion, the terror of a child whose own voice became unrecognizable with each passing day. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, a psychiatrist who secretly worked with some victims, documented in personal letters, Isaiah frequently cried for his mother, but his voice had become something ancient and terrible. It was as if a child was trapped inside a vessel that channeled something inhuman. The financial records of the operation reveal the true scope of the conspiracy. The order received funding from at least 12 prominent industrial families, all obsessed with the prospect of accessing what they called pre-linguistic consciousness through occult science. Each experiment cost the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of current dollars. Winters did not work alone. Intercepted correspondence reveals a network of collaborators in at least 8 states, all conducting variations of the same macabre experiments. Isaiah was just one victim in a national operation of child exploitation disguised as revolutionary linguistic research. As I deepened my investigation, I discovered that the experiments on Isaiah were part of a much more ambitious and sinister project. The Order of Ancestral Tongues had developed a pseudoscientific theory called primordial language reclamation, which combined experimental medicine with occultism in an absolutely diabolical manner. The central hypothesis was that all humans are born with the innate capacity to speak what they termed the first tongue, supposedly the original language of mankind before the mythological Tower of Babel incident. This language, according to their twisted philosophy, could access realms beyond normal human perception and potentially control forces both natural and supernatural. The methods used defy any notion of humanity. Isaiah was kept in a specially constructed underground cell, with walls covered in alchemical symbols engraved on copper plates. The environment was maintained at a specific temperature and illuminated only by candles made with human fat, a detail I discovered with particular horror in the supply records. During weekly rituals, Isaiah was positioned in the center of a ritual circle while Winters and his assistants recited incantations in medieval Latin. Simultaneously, he was subjected to medical procedures that included spinal fluid drainage, cerebrospinal implantation, and injections of psychoactive substances directly into the central nervous system. Dr. Cornelius Blackwood, a contemporary investigator who had access to the laboratories after their discovery, documented, "The smell still remained after decades, a mixture of chemicals, decomposition, and something indefinably malignant. The walls were stained with substances that we prefer not to identify." Records show that Isaiah developed inexplicable abilities during the experiments. Winters documented episodes where the child demonstrated knowledge of historical events that he could not have learned, spoke in linguistic patterns that defied known language structures, and showed comprehension of complex philosophical concepts, as if the linguistic transformation had somehow compressed centuries of forbidden knowledge in his young mind. Even more disturbing were the documented, prophetic episodes. Isaiah began to predict future events with frightening accuracy, including deaths of medical team members and even regional political changes. Winters saw these manifestations as evidence that his experiments were expanding the specimen's temporal-linguistic capabilities. The physical suffering documented is indescribable. Medical photographs show Isaiah developing profound neurological changes, his vocal cords restructuring into configurations never seen in human subjects, his facial muscles adapting to produce sounds beyond normal human capacity, all while maintaining the cranial structure and dentition of a 5-year-old child. It was a biological contradiction that transformed each attempt at communication into agony. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a nurse who secretly worked to document the abuses, wrote in her diary, "Every night I heard Isaiah in the basement. They weren't a child's cries, but the hoarse, rhythmic utterances of something ancient speaking through a child's throat. The sound haunts me even today, 40 years later." The experiments reached their climax during what Winters called the ritual of linguistic transcendence. During a ceremony that lasted 3 consecutive nights, Isaiah was subjected to the final procedure, complete extraction of cerebrospinal fluid while artificially kept alive through primitive machines that functioned as precursors to modern life support systems. The objective was to extract what Winters believed to be the crystallized linguistic essence, a substance that he theorized contained a complete pre-Babel language compressed into a transmissible form. This substance would then be refined and administered to paying members of the order as an elixir of transcendental communication. The final medical records of Isaiah are too disturbing for complete description. Suffice it to say that the child, at 5 chronological years, presented biological characteristics never before documented in medical literature, but maintained childhood consciousness and memories until the end. His death was officially recorded as neurological collapse related to unknown pathology, a bureaucratic lie that masked ritualistic murder. Professor Edmund Crowe, expert in historical secret societies, analyzes, the order of ancestral tongues represented what happens when medical knowledge combines with uncontrolled ambition and degenerated occultism. They weren't scientists, they were predators who used scientific vocabulary to rationalize unimaginable atrocities. During my investigation, I managed to locate 3 survivors who had direct contact with the events of 1844. Their testimonies, collected in interviews that I personally conducted, reveal details that no official document ever recorded. Eleanor Whitmore, now 93 years old, was a young trainee nurse who worked at the Franklin County Hospital during the period of the experiments. She received me in her isolated home, but only after I presented specific credentials and swore that her identity would remain protected. I was just a 16-year-old girl, Eleanor recalled with a trembling voice, but even so I realized that something was terribly wrong in that place. There were corridors where we were forbidden to enter, strange sounds during the early morning hours, and that smell, that sweet and putrid smell that remained in the air. Eleanor was the only person outside Winter's team who actually saw Isaiah during the experiments. One night, while working beyond her hours, she accidentally witnessed one of the ritual sessions through a basement window. What I saw that night changed my life forever, she continued, her hands trembling as she held a cup of tea. There were men in black hoods, candles burning in circles, and in the center there was a child whose mouth moved in ways no human mouth should move, producing sounds that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was Isaiah, though I only knew his name decades later. The second testimony came from Thomas Morrison, son of the municipal medical examiner who conducted the autopsies of the victims. At 85 years old, Thomas still possessed some of his father's notes, who had secretly documented discrepancies in official death records. My father knew something was wrong, Thomas explained during our interview. He found children's bodies with characteristics that contradicted all medical knowledge, but the families were instructed not to ask questions. There was political pressure for him to falsify the autopsy reports. Dr. Morrison had secretly photographed some of the victims, including Isaiah. The images, which Thomas allowed me to examine, show anatomical contradictions that defy scientific explanation: infantile skeletons with signs of unprecedented neural development, child organs with strange growths typical of much older specimens, young brains with structural modifications characteristic of advanced linguistic development. My father suspected that the children were being exposed to substances that altered their physiological development, Thomas added. He found anomalous levels of strange compounds in the tissues, but when he tried to report to the authorities, he was threatened with losing his medical license. The most disturbing testimony came from Sarah Caldwell, now 88 years old, who was one of the few survivors of the experiments themselves. At 7 years old, she had been selected for the program, but managed to escape before the procedures were concluded. Sarah still carries physical scars from the initial experiments, injection marks at the base of her skull and neural scarring that doctors have never been able to adequately explain. Her memories of the period are fragmented, but the details she can remember are haunting. They kept us in cells in the basement, Sarah recalled during our conversation, conducted in the presence of her grandson for emotional safety reasons. There were other children there, perhaps 10 or 12. Isaiah was in the cell next to mine, and I could hear him speak every night. Sarah described nocturnal rituals where the children were forced to participate in ceremonies that combined medical procedures with occultist elements. Men in white would come to fetch a different child each night. When Isaiah was chosen, I never saw him the same again. Each day that passed, his voice became less human, more ancient. Sarah's most shocking description involves Isaiah's last days. He had become unrecognizable, a child whose eyes seemed to contain centuries of forbidden knowledge, but who still asked for his mother in moments of lucidity. One night, I heard sounds from his cell that no human throat could produce, then silence. The next morning, they said he had departed for a better place. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, who interviewed Sarah decades later as part of a study on childhood trauma, confirmed the authenticity of her memories through regressive hypnosis techniques. Sarah's recollections are too consistent and detailed to be fantasies. She really witnessed these horrors. All three testimonies converge on one fundamental point: the existence of a conspiracy that extended far beyond the hospital walls. Influential families, local authorities, and even clergy members were involved or, at minimum, aware of the activities of the Order of Ancestral Tongues. It wasn't isolated madness, concluded Eleanor Whitmore. It was an organized system, protected by powerful people who believed that the suffering of some children was an acceptable price to achieve communication with forces beyond our world. My investigation into Isaiah's case extended over more than 2 years, during which I discovered truths that shook not only my faith in humanity, but my own mental sanity. What began as academic curiosity transformed into an obsession that consumed my professional and personal life. The Order of the Ancestral Tongues was not limited to Franklin County Hospital. Documents discovered in declassified military archives reveal that the organization maintained similar laboratories in at least 15 states, all operating under different names and disguises. The total number of victims may reach hundreds of children, all sacrificed on the altar of macabre pseudoscience. Dr. Elijah Winters was never tried for his crimes. Immigration records show that he left the United States in 1849, returning to Europe with considerable fortune and a new identity. Some historians believe that he continued his experiments in Bavaria, contributing to research that decades later would influence even more sinister military medical programs. The founding members of the order also escaped justice. The industrial families that financed the experiments used their political influence to suppress investigations and destroy evidence. Many of their descendants still occupy positions of power in American society, carrying secrets they prefer to keep buried. As for Isaiah, his existence was systematically erased from official records. Altered birth certificate, destroyed school records, unnamed tombstone in an unidentified cemetery, as if he had never existed. Only in the secret archives of the order is his life documented, reduced to scientific codes and disturbing photographs. During my investigation, I experienced phenomena that defy rational explanation. Vivid nightmares where I saw Isaiah as he was before the experiments, dreams where an eternally transformed child begged me to tell his story. Coincidence or manifestation of a consciousness that refuses to be forgotten, I shall never know. Professor Edmund Crowe, who collaborated with my research, developed a disturbing theory. It is possible that the order's experiments created something beyond conventional scientific understanding. The linguistic manipulations may have produced a form of consciousness that transcends the normal limits of mortality. Today, at the location where Franklin County Hospital operated, there are only ruins covered by wild vegetation. Local authorities discourage visitations, claiming issues of structural safety. But the few who venture there report sensations of inexplicable discomfort, childlike whispers carried by the wind in no known language, and the persistent impression of being observed by invisible eyes. I established a small private memorial for Isaiah and the other victims, a simple bronze plaque hidden among the ruins, where I regularly leave flowers. It is my gesture of personal apology for a society that failed to protect its most vulnerable members. This investigation cost me more than my academic reputation. I lost the ability to sleep peacefully, to trust in the intrinsic goodness of humanity, to believe that scientific progress is always beneficial. But I gained something equally valuable, the certainty that some stories must be told, no matter how disturbing they may be. Isaiah's memory lives on not as an experimental subject or medical statistic, but as a symbol of the eternal need for vigilance against the corruption of science by power and greed. His short life, tragically altered by the Order's experiments, serves as a reminder that true human progress is only achieved when accompanied by unwavering compassion and ethics. I conclude this account with a solemn warning: the seeds of the Order of the Ancestral Tongues have not been completely eradicated. In modern laboratories, under respectable scientific nomenclatures, similar research may be being conducted at this very moment. Only our constant vigilance and our refusal to forget can prevent tragedies like Isaiah's from repeating. May his story never be forgotten. May his voice echo through the centuries as testimony to the resistance of the human spirit against institutionalized cruelty. In eternal memory of Isaiah Blackwood and all lost children, you did not die in vain. Professor Edmund Crowe. Confidential Archive, 2025.